Hello, and welcome back to another segment of the National Preparedness Month series. I'm Greg Ramirez, Emergency Manager for Clackamas Fire. Today I'm joined by yet another good friend. I really enjoy this job because I get to work with all my dear friends. Today is a special one for me. I'm working with Kenton Johnson. Kenton is a chaplain for Clackamas Fire District 1, and Kenton assists us and supports us in dealing with issues that we might be facing, whether following a disaster or just in our personal lives. So is a great resource for us, but also he has great insight into a subject that we're discussing today, and that's something that's out of the norm of your normal disaster preparedness subjects, and that is children, preparing them for disaster and dealing with or working with them after a disaster, and that is supporting them with their emotional needs or issues that they might face. So Kenton, there's so much facing children today. Day in and day out, we talk about the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. They study it in school. They hear it on the news. They hear us talk about it as adults. And then, of course, the school shootings. It's just an unfortunate reality that's just really part of our world these days.
Yeah.
So knowing all these big issues are looming, how does that impact children?
Well, in some terrible ways, and they can certainly grow from it, but it's tough, right? It's tough because they get bombarded with images
Right.
all the time, for one thing.
Absolutely.
And then there's the reality that it could happen. The reality is also that it's not likely to happen.
Okay.
And sometimes it's good for us just to remind them, yeah, that really does happen in places. They need to know the facts of
Right.
that. They don't necessarily need all the details. The younger they are, probably the fewer details they need to know.
Right.
But they need to know that things can happen, but they also need to be aware that, generally speaking, they're in safe places.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's a good message because it wouldn't seem that way. Seeing all the messages they get from social media, from the news.
Yeah.
That's really a great point. So, how do we know our children are having a challenge dealing with either a real disaster or just news of a disaster? What behaviors might they exhibit?
Right. So it is so important as we as parents and grandparents know our children and our grandchildren,
Sure.
or the kids that are around us for that matter. What are their normal reactions to something? Typically, if you're looking for it, you can see changes in behavior. It might be something from just being extra quiet to bouncing off the walls.
Right.
It could go in any direction. It's different for different kids, and at different ages it's going to be different as
Okay.
well. So is there sleeplessness going on? Probably is going to be some.
Right.
Does it
Makes
continue
sense.
for more than just a few days? You want to watch for that. It may be headaches. It could be nausea.
Okay.
It could be they're lippier than normal, maybe, or more compliant than normal. So you just look for the changes. Know there will be changes, and so look for what they are. What they are is probably not as important as noticing that they're having some reaction.
Okay.
And then you got to figure out, what are the resources that you can have to help them work
Right.
through what they're working through.
Right. I'm not an expert in that field, so I see that my child is either acting out or exhibiting some behavior that's not normal. Where do I turn next?
Man, you know what? Those things you got on either side of that big, beautiful bald head you got,
Yeah.
those are the things that
Okay.
are the most important. Listen to your children. Ask them, hey, tell me what's going on right now. What are you thinking? How are you feeling about that? For some kids, and it's not just when they're younger for that matter, sometimes it's not easy for them to know how to express
How to
that with
articulate that,
words.
right.
Yeah, but drawing
Oh.
can be an incredible tool for a kid to express themselves. So give them crayons, give them paper, give them pens, or
Some outlet.
Yeah, give them an outlet, an
Okay.
artistic outlet where they can do it that way if you're finding that they can't articulate that very
Right.
well. Yeah.
Good. So I'm sure there are agencies and resources available. What do you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, depends on the nature of the disaster
Okay.
that they're going through, or that they've been through, or that you're anticipating for that matter.
Right.
So one of the first resources is you as a family having a plan in place.
Right.
If you have a plan in place that you've even practiced beforehand, and certainly that you've talked about, that kind of information can be something you can fall back on after the event.
And it demystifies the whole thing
Yeah,
for the
it
kid.
demystifies it and make sure they know. It's amazing how many little kids don't know their dad's or mom's name.
That's right.
So know the first name and the last name of mom and dad.
Okay.
Have a phone number for mom and or dad.
Simple things.
So even when they're 3 and 4 years old, oftentimes they can remember that. And if they can know their own home address
That's
as
right.
well, wonderful. But so those are resources you can do beforehand. But
Right.
after the fact, it depends on the nature of the
Okay.
emergency. So in a large emergency, in a natural disaster especially, for instance, you might find The Red Cross is going to be involved. Oftentimes, the Red Cross will come up together with the community to have a resource center. It might be the same as a shelter. It might be separate from a shelter, depending
Right.
on the emergency. Oftentimes, you can get incredible information there.
Okay,
And
so besides just rescue resources, they're going to bring support resources and
yeah,
information. That's
absolutely.
good. That's good news.
Yeah, and sometimes that's going to include mental health professionals
Right.
as well, and not just psychologists or psychiatrists. Sometimes that may be counselors. It might be chaplains.
Right.
It might be the trauma intervention program, and chaplains and trauma intervention program tend to show up oftentimes at those smaller emergencies
That's
as
right.
well.
So speaking of smaller emergencies, right? Our discussion's been focused on the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake and school shootings. What about these normal day in and day out things that are, just normal but might be tragic to a child?
Right. Yeah, we say normal in the sense that they happen more frequently, right? And I say smaller because in the sense geographically maybe they're smaller, maybe dollar-wise they're smaller, but to the person going through losing their mom in a car wreck, that's huge. It's as big as Cascadia to that 6-year-old child. So yeah, how do we react to those? How do we help with those? Again, a lot of those same resources are going to come in play with that. Two specific resources that I might mention is going to be 211. It's a phone number you can just dial and you can say, hey, we're going through this. What resources are available to help me help my children through this? And another resource, and you can get to 211 on the web as well for some incredible resources about everything, pretty much anything that you would need. You can certainly lean on a trauma intervention program or on the chaplains if they show up to an accident, and if they don't, if they're not there, ask for them. Say, hey, can you send me a chaplain or can you send me somebody from the trauma intervention
Make
program?
sure you're asking
You
for
absolutely can, and they will send people who will have some good resources and help you walk through some of those difficult first moments through things. But then if it has to do with a child going through the grief of a loved one that's died, the Dougie Center is an amazing local resource we have here that is regionally known, but they're very local to us. They're in Portland, and they're incredible at helping children get through the grief of a loved one.
Wonderful. Well, Ken, I can't thank you enough for the work you do and for coming to talk with us today.
Thank you.
This is a challenging subject, and the more prepared we can be up front and lay the groundwork will mean that we can better deal with not just the disaster itself, but the fallout that it might have for our children. So, Kenton, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time as we continue the month of September, National Preparedness Month. I'm Greg Ramirez, Emergency Manager for Clackamas Fire.